Hello and welcome back. So let's jump into testing. Let's look at testing cycles that we can test our clients to make sure they've quit. Now, what we've done right here is jumped all the way to the end of this stop smoking session because we first looked at priming, how to set the unconscious environment. But now we're going to look at testing, which is the opposite end, priming coming one of the first things we do and testing being the end, because all the stuff in between, like your methods and your technique, will start to fit in quite well if we look at these first two categories first. So testing, in a nutshell, is to make sure our clients quit or have quit and that we've done everything we can in our power to help them achieve this. And I want you to keep that idea in mind of everything we've done in our power to help them overcome this. So what is testing? Testing is making sure that the reason they've come in for the stop smoking session has been covered, and to make sure that other things that have made them smoke in the past have been eradicated and have been resolved as well. There's a couple of different categories I want to look inside of testing that will give you an exclusive look on to what I would say the most successful part of the sessions that I've done with my stop smokers to make sure they leave. Usually after one session, as you get better at this, it will not only become one session, but you could break it down in maybe half an hour or 40 minutes or sometimes 20-minute quick sessions, as long as you cover this testing cycle. Now, I don't exclusively just use testing right at the end, and I suggest you don't either. We'll look at ways you can input these little testing cycles at any point, even at the start, even during the priming of your session with your smoker. So let's look at the basics first. The first thing I want to look at is, let's say you've done your method, you've done your technique, they've come out of trance. Now we're at the point where we need to test them. We need to make sure what they experienced during the trance is enough for them to quit then and there. Knowing that we don't want to deal with this 5 or 6 sessions anymore, we'd like to get this done in one session, maybe 2. Now, what is the first testing thing we need to do? We first need to ask them, how do they feel? What happened as a result of you going into trance, and how do you feel? So how does this sound for a little testing question? And you can use this question knowing there's many ways to ask it, but it's the principle and the direction that I'm setting that's important. A client comes out of trance and I say, hey, how do you feel? And they say, oh, great. Trance was fantastic. Remember, we set it up and we primed it like so beforehand. And I say, great. How do you feel about smoking right now? That's my first testing question. It's a very soft question because we're going to start off soft and we're going to move into a few harder testing questions at the end for a specific reason. And let's say they come out of trance, they're feeling relaxed, they're feeling great. And you say, how do you feel about smoking now? Let's say they say, well, I don't feel like I smoke. Excellent. You can almost tick the box, if there was a box to tick, that they've come out and they've done everything they needed to. And believe it or not, this is generally where therapists stop. They don't do any more than this. They get a, yes, I feel great from the session we just had, and I don't feel like I smoke now. I feel good. I think I've quit. And they would tend to send their clients away and wonder why maybe a couple of hours later their clients call up and say, hey, I started smoking again. Or a couple of days later they say, well, it didn't quite work. I started smoking again. I want a refund, or I need to come in for another session. And if the therapist has set it up beforehand to take 5 or 6 sessions, this is what the client comes out thinking. They'll go away, they'll start smoking again, and they go, well, he did say it was 5 or 6 sessions, so I guess I can smoke right up to the last session because I don't really have to quit until the 6th session. You could see how that conflict could start. So let's take it back to basics. Clients come out of trance, said, yep, I feel great. Said, how do you feel about smoking now? They say, I feel good. What I want to do is ask them, how do they know? Simply, how do you know you've quit? How do you know you feel good? How do you know you don't need a smoke? Well, I just don't feel like one. Excellent. So you can hear the testing question in that I'm testing them about the answer they've given me. So this is the first part of the test. I might do this 3 or 4 times. Let me give you some simple questions that follow more of a logical line that you could ask, just to get the conversation flowing again from the trance I've just been in. So you've come out, you don't feel like a smoke now. Well, no, I don't. Excellent. So how do you know you don't feel like it? Well, I'm really relaxed right now. You are relaxed, aren't you? Did you need a cigarette to feel this relaxed? They say, well, no. Excellent. So your unconscious mind must have done something. So you don't feel like a smoke now. What do you think will happen later? Well, I don't think I'll smoke later either. How do you know? Well, the more I think about it, I don't really have those cravings anymore. Excellent. So you've come out of trance, you don't feel like a smoke now, and you think you won't smoke later. How good is that? Well done. Great job. So what have I done right there? You can hear it's very conversational. I'm using some of the criteria they've given me, And I'm just repeating back their success. We call this the echo effect. As they say they feel good, they don't feel like a smoke now, I just agree and go, yeah, great job. You did a really great thing through that trance. And I know you don't want to smoke now, and it's awesome you don't feel like a smoke later too. Well done. I'm giving them positive reinforcement to let them know that the expectations, there was none, and whatever they did inside trance or their unconscious mind did was exactly the way they needed to quit. Now, if you were to send your client away after this, you probably have a 50-50 chance of it working. And sometimes I've forgotten to test or I've been in a rush, and that's all I've done, and I've hoped for the best and it's worked out perfectly. But again, we want to stack the deck in our favor. So the first other part of the test, that's the first part of the test, we call this small testing or very light testing, is I want to move into a little bit of a harder test. I want to make sure that I've covered everything they need. So the first testing cycle really I want to look at is what I call emotional testing. Because I want them to realize that if they feel great now and they feel relaxed, is later on, they're not going to feel like this. So I need them to be aware of it. So how would this sound? Let's say I've done a couple of light testing questions. I'm getting them to feel good about the job they've done. I'll say, well, you feel relaxed and good now, but you got to realize you're not always going to feel like this. So let's say a couple of hours from now, you go home and you start to feel a little bit bored or something like that. Do you think you'll need a smoke then? So I've given them a setup scene. I've given them a scene of the possibilities, and I want them just to test it against themselves. So how do I do this? I just say, look, imagine yourself later on, you're a little bit bored. Do you think you would need a smoke then? Just really think about it. And the important thing to do right here, although I've said imagine, and imagine could almost sound like it's not going to happen, but I want them to really consider it. So I don't want to rush this process. This testing can sometimes take 10, 15, 20 minutes. So once I've said, imagine yourself later, a little bit bored, hear the little bit, I don't want to say extremely bored because that's a little bit of a harder test, a little bit bored, do you think you'll smoke? Just really think about it. Maybe put yourself in the scenario, you're a little bit bored later on today. Do you think they'll smoke? And I want to let them sit there and think about it. Let them think a bit more, and they come back and say, no, I don't think I will. Excellent. How do you know? Well, as I think about myself being bored, I'm actually excited that I can maybe do some push-ups or some sit-ups or go for a run around the block instead. Fantastic. What have they done right here? They've actually given me what's called a resource about something they'll do instead of smoking. So right now, we're really stacking the deck in our favor right now. So that's a little bit of a harder test. And I want to make it a little bit harder with this emotional as well. So I want to do this 2 or 3 times. So I want to sound something like this. So let's say you go back to work on Monday and you get to work and you're stressed. You find all this paperwork on your desk and you're just not off to a good start to the day. Do you think you'll smoke then? Just put yourself in that scenario. Just imagine it for a moment. Take your time and just make sure that you don't feel like a smoke just by thinking about it. And again, I'm going to let them think about it. Maybe I help them build the scene up and say, where would you be sitting? What's happening at work right now? And I want them to give me the answer. Now, let's just keep going on the positive for now. We'll look at some troubleshooting methods later if it's a no for the answer they give us. And let's say they thought about it for a while and they said, no, I don't think I will. Excellent. How do you know? What do you do instead? Well, you know what? Throughout the trance today, I realized that I would get stressed at work and I'd have a smoke. But now I just think I'll go have a cup of coffee instead and I'll just laugh about the stress. Fantastic. So now they've given me another resource. Excellent. So I want to give them one more try of this emotional testing. I'm going to do a little bit harder. So I'm going to add to the scene. So let's say you're at work, all this paperwork, you're stressed out, and your boss is yelling at you. And you find out your pay's getting cut, and there's a possibility of layoffs and shrinking inside the business, and you might actually lose your job. Imagine how stressful that's going to be. And you can hear how hard that test is going to be, although I don't want them to lose their job, and God forbid that would ever happen to anybody, but it's just that little possibility. I want to make sure that smoking has covered all the categories and possibilities inside their life. And again, let them think about it. Tell them to take their time. And let's say afterwards they think about it, say, no, I really wouldn't. I'll just go get another job. I've got the skills. I feel confident now, and all of the rest. So what I've done right there, I've really pushed them, and I'm saying, hey, I want to test you on all of this sort of stuff. I want to make sure if this possibilities come up, I don't want you to fall back onto cigarettes regardless. So that's emotional testing. The next thing I want to look at is something quite sneaky, which I call scenario testing. Now, scenario testing is putting them in an environment where they could smoke again. So let's consider this. Let's say my client comes out of trance and I want to start off with environmental testing. I want to put some scene testing. I want to make sure that if they go home, they're not going to smoke and all that stuff. Now, when we talked about emotional testing before, I'm not saying you've got to do all 3 in a row, then go to the environment, and then go to the last way of testing. You can put them all in together. You can do just some, do the other. But realistically, I'm going to test my client maybe a dozen times because there's something I'm trying to do with this testing, which I'll reveal in a moment. So what's the environmental testing or the scenery testing? Is I want to say, hey, you told me before that your partner smokes. So you've come out of trance, you say you're a non-smoker now. Just imagine you get home and you walk in and your partner's having a smoke. Do you think you have a cigarette then? So you're seeing I'm giving them an environment where they would normally smoke because there could be some associations as to the reason they smoke in that environment. And again, just let them think about it. As a therapist, you don't need to do anything more than just set the scene, drop them in the scene and say, hey, think about this. Is this a possibility? And let's say my client, Joe Blog, says, no, I don't think I will. I'll just go in the other room until she's finished. So that's a slight test, a very small test. So now I'm going to add to this test. Let's say they told me beforehand that they're actually going to a barbecue after this session and they know that their friends are going to be smoking there as well. You can see the environment we're setting up. And I say, okay, imagine you go to this barbecue after our session today. You're a non-smoker now, feeling great. And you go there and all your best friends are there. And they're sort of pestering you saying, hypnosis doesn't work. You couldn't have quit. You've been smoking for 30 years. And now you're telling me after seeing that therapist once you're a non-smoker, just try one. Just see if it works. Just put it in your mouth. See if you find those old cravings you had before. And I'll just say, think about that as a possibility. And now, do you feel like a smoke? Do you think you'd fall back on smoking then? I'll be quiet and let them consider it. I'm just setting up these testing sequences and getting harder and harder with each one. And it's just, I'm putting possibilities. And they come back and say, no, I'll just laugh in their face and walk away and feel free as a person because I don't smoke anymore. Fantastic. And I'll give them one more try. Let's say they've told me not only did their partner smoke and they're going to a barbecue beforehand. Let's say they say on the car on the way to work they used to smoke because it would help them de-stress from all the traffic. I now want to put them inside that little scene. Now, before I get into this, and you can see where we're going, consider where I'm getting all this scenery from. Where am I getting these ideas and this environments that I'm setting up for the testing? It's probably what my client told me before. I've had a bit of a chat to them with the questioning cycle we'll get through a little bit later, and I found out this information through the questions. I might have asked, hey, what are you doing after this session today? Well, I'm going to a barbecue. I've got this. Yeah, my partner does smoke. Maybe it was a question I asked them beforehand. So I'm just remembering the criteria they've given me before to add to my testing sequences later. So you can see how simple that could be. Or if they haven't, I'll just give them a mock scenario. I'll find, hey, what do you do with your spare time? I like to go to barbecues. I'm very social. I know how to add that into my testing cycle. So let's sit them in the car and say, hey, there's traffic. Your air conditioning's not working. It's in Brisbane. It's stinking hot. There's people beeping and swearing at you, cutting you off. Maybe someone scratched your car by running too close next to you in their car. Do you feel like a smoke then? I just want to keep going harder and harder and harder. And if they come out and say, no, I'll do this instead, they've given me another resource. Excellent. Fantastic job. So that's the 2 testing cycle. What's the last one? I call this environmental testing. Very similar to scenery, but it's actually the combination of the emotion and the scenery tests. But what I'm going to do instead of me as a therapist coming up with something, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to ask them, what do they think would have them fall off the wagon of being a smoker, of being a non-smoker? So I'm going to say, hey, we know you're a non-smoker now. Is there anything other than the barbecue, other than the stress in the car, other than your partner smoking, other than the stress at work, other than anything else we cover that you think would put you back on smoking? So what have I done right here? I've done something actually very strategic. I've taken all the pressure off me as a therapist and I put it back on them and said, you need to now do a bit of work. You need to think of anything, even if it's a camping trip that you only go on once every 4 years that you like to have a smoke in the tent before you go to sleep. I want to make sure they remember that. And I'll keep pestering them and say, come on, you've got to think of something. Is there anything? And they say, well, I can't think of anything. Well, try harder. We've got plenty of time. Take your time. Is there anything at all? Anything in your life that would have you fall back on smoking? Now, I've done this as a real example, and the tent example I just gave you was the real example. I had a lady come in, and I gave this option to her, and she sat there for maybe a couple of minutes and thought, oh, I just remembered we actually go camping every 4 years, and I like to have a smoke then. And I had to add this to my testing scenario. Luckily, she said, well, I don't think I'll have one then either. But it was lucky she came up with it because then I had a chance to test against it. And I just want my client to sit there and come up with something. Even if they can't, just keep pestering them with a nice approach. Don't want to be too overt about it and push them and say, think of something. But just let them know, hey, we want to make sure we cover all of these grounds. So what am I doing? What's all this testing thing about? What I'm trying to do as a therapist, and what most therapists are very scared of doing, is I want to break my session. I want to ruin all the good work I've done, and I want to ruin all the good work they have done. Now, why is this? It seems a little bit strange that I actually want my client to fail. I'm actually testing them to have them fail in front of me. And that's the key idea right there, to have them fail in front of me. So how would I know they failed? Let's say I'm testing them and they say, well, no, I think I would smoke then and there under these circumstances. Excellent. Now I can do a quick session on that. And because they're in front of me and they're still going to be a little bit of a trance, it's going to be very quick, very easy to resolve, but it's easier for me to resolve it then and there rather than them go away for a couple of weeks and come back and be disappointed with their results. Because they're either going to be disappointed at me, or they're more than likely going to be disappointed in themselves, which means there's other factors being introduced into stuff like failure, or I can't do it, or hypnosis doesn't work. And these could come up against me in the session. Now I've got to deal with them. I'd rather deal with them then and there. So at any time a client says, well, I think I'd smoke here and here, you would have to pat yourself on the back and be so grateful that this come out now in front of you, because you can fix it immediately. And this actually is the big reason why clients relapse. So this testing cycle is an exclusive insider look of how to stop clients relapsing. And already you can probably think into yourself in regards to this testing, thinking, wow, if I get all the criteria of boredom, stress, and addiction, hunger, whatever those criteria are that normal therapists set up beforehand, if I do that all in one session, they could quit in one session. And that's exactly the mindset I want you to have. Instead of taking 6 sessions or 10 sessions to cover all the criteria that smokers should have, or that therapists tell their clients they should have, I'm doing it all in 1, maybe 2 sessions. And usually the second session is just a little follow-up, might be one little thing I missed, not always going to get everything. And that session might take 10 or 15 minutes as a little backup session. But 95% of my work, if not higher, is done in that one session. So that's the testing cycle. We did emotional testing. We're finding out, letting them know, hey, you're not going to always feel this good. We've done some scenery testing. Hey, your partner said she smokes at home. Do you think you'll smoke then? We've done environmental testing. We're putting the pressure back on the client and say, hey, can you think of anything that would put you back onto smoking, because I want to cover this now. So that's the last part of the session. And what I'm trying to do with this testing is I'm trying to break them. Now, I want to point out something of exclusive value right here. Don't go all the way to the hard testing first. I've seen therapists do this, and it's not a nice environment to set up. Start small, get harder and harder and harder and harder. Now, in my own career, I've had a lot of clients after many testings of maybe a dozen testings, they get pretty bored of it and they go, hey, I'm quitting. I promise you, I will not smoke. Can I just leave now? I want to enjoy my life. So by the time a client gets a little bit annoyed with me, I know they've quit. And I can say to them, hey, if you leave now, it's because you wanted to. I'm happy to sit here all day and make sure we get everything. But if you're happy to leave now, all the results are back on you then. That's a perfect place to be as a therapist and as a client. We're giving them the power back from what the smoking used to do for them. So that's the testing cycle. That's usually the last part of the session. But you could see how you could put those little testing cycles at any point throughout your technique that you use. Maybe using symbols, or maybe using external trance procedures. You can put those little testing things in anyway. Let's say a client experiences a bit of hypnotic phenomena. They get a hand levitation. And you say, well, as that hand's lifting now, how do you feel about smoking? Well, I don't think I'd smoke anymore. Excellent. Great. So I've had a little test there as well. And you can do that anyway. It's not exclusive just to the end of the session. So I hope you enjoyed that testing. You can see how priming and testing are starting to really set a positive environment for absolute success. So the third principle I want to look at is setting a context. And actually the context will actually pretty much come after the priming, and it's part of the priming sequence, but we're going to set a context to allow their unconscious mind power to help them overcome smoking, not the other way around. We want to make sure you as a therapist realize that you are not doing anything except setting the environment, and then we're giving all the power back to their unconscious mind to do all the work for us and all the work for the client. It takes less stress off, it takes all the stress off the client and takes all the stress off you as therapists. You really don't have to do much for it. So let's look at setting the right context to let the unconscious mind know that, hey, you can do this. You've got all the power. You've done this before with other certain things in their life. I'm just going to remind you of when you've done that. And this is what we talk about, setting the right context. So when you're ready, let's move over to the third principle and set this context for absolute success. We'll see you then.